Cleopatra was more than just a queen. She was a legend, a woman whose power, ambition, and intelligence reshaped history. But who was the real Cleopatra? History has often been unfair to her, focusing too much on her beauty and her lovers rather than her remarkable political mind and ruthless determination to rule Egypt. Egypt, once a great empire of pharaohs and towering pyramids, was no longer the supreme power it had been centuries before. The country was under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal family that had taken control of Egypt after the conquests of Alexander the Great. Though they ruled Egypt, the Ptolemies were not Egyptian. They spoke Greek, followed Greek customs, and often treated Egypt as their personal treasure chest rather than their homeland. Cleopatra, however, was different. Born in 69 BC, Cleopatra VII was the daughter of Ptolemy XII Elites, a weak and unpopular ruler known more for his love of luxury than his ability to govern. His reign was marked by chaos, heavy debts, and increasing Roman influence over Egypt. Cleopatra grew up in a palace filled with intrigue, betrayal, and political assassinations. In the Ptolemaic tradition, family loyalty was non-existent. Brothers and sisters turned against each other, alliances shifted like desert sands, and poison was often the weapon of choice. But Cleopatra was no ordinary princess. Unlike the rulers before her, she immersed herself in the Egyptian language and culture, making her the first in her dynasty to truly embrace the people she ruled. While her ancestors saw themselves as Greek rulers of a foreign land, Cleopatra saw herself as the true queen of Egypt. She studied philosophy, politics, and science. She was well versed in mathematics, medicine, and literature. Her intelligence was as legendary as her charm. Yet intelligence alone would not guarantee her the throne. When her father died in 51 BC, Cleopatra, then only 18 years old, was named co-ruler alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was just 10 years old. According to Ptolemaic tradition, the two were to be married and rule together, a practice that had long been used to keep power within the family. But Cleopatra had no intention of sharing power with a child, let alone being controlled by the scheming advisors who surrounded him. She was young, but she was ready to rule. At first, she was careful. She signed documents in both her name and Ptolemy's, maintaining the illusion of joint rule. But behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly to strengthen her position. She built alliances with Egypt's military leaders, secured the loyalty of high-ranking officials, and began shaping herself as the sole ruler of Egypt. She had something that no one in her family had before: charisma, intelligence, and the ability to inspire loyalty. The people loved her, the scholars admired her, and even her enemies respected her cunning. But power in the Ptolemaic court was never secure. The advisors of Ptolemy XIII, fearing Cleopatra's growing influence, turned against her. They plotted her downfall, spreading lies that she planned to kill her brother and take the throne for herself. Soon, Cleopatra found herself outmaneuvered. In 49 BC, she was forced to flee Alexandria, leaving her throne behind. Her enemies had won, but they had underestimated her. Cleopatra would not give up so easily. As she fled to Syria, she began gathering an army of mercenaries, preparing for the day she would return to reclaim her kingdom. But fate had other plans. As Cleopatra prepared for war, an unexpected figure arrived in Egypt: Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome. His presence would change everything. Cleopatra saw her chance. She would not fight her way back to the throne. She would outthink, outmaneuver, and outplay her enemies. And so, she devised a daring plan, one that would go down in history as one of the boldest political moves ever made. The young queen had one shot to reclaim her throne, and she intended to take it. She needed Rome. Caesar had pursued his political rival, Pompey, to Alexandria, only to find that Ptolemy XIII had taken matters into his own hands. In a desperate attempt to win Caesar's favor, Ptolemy had ordered Pompey's execution, presenting Caesar with his severed head as a gift. But Ptolemy had made a terrible miscalculation. Caesar was no ordinary man. He valued loyalty above all else, and Pompey, though an enemy in war, had once been his friend. The sight of his old rival's head filled him with fury, and instead of rewarding Ptolemy, he seized control of Alexandria, declaring that he would be the one to decide Egypt's ruler. For Cleopatra, This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. If she could win over Caesar, she would not need to fight her brother. Rome would do it for her. But there was a problem. Ptolemy and his advisors controlled the royal palace, and Cleopatra knew that if she attempted to walk in, she would be captured and executed before she ever reached Caesar. And so, she devised a plan so bold, so daring. In the dead of night, she had herself smuggled into the palace. Wrapped inside a carpet, or some say a linen sack, she was carried past guards, past assassins, past those who wanted her dead. When the rug was unrolled before Caesar, out tumbled not a humble exile, but a queen. Caesar was captivated. History often reduces this moment to a story of seduction, of Cleopatra using her beauty to enchant the Roman leader. But this was not just romance, it was strategy. Cleopatra was intelligent, charismatic, and politically astute. She did not beg for help. She did not play the victim. She presented herself as Egypt's rightful ruler, the queen who could bring stability to Rome's most valuable ally. And Caesar listened. By morning, Ptolemy XII's advisors realized their mistake. Cleopatra and Caesar had formed an alliance, and it was too late to stop it. Outraged, they declared war. The siege of Alexandria was brutal. Egyptian forces, loyal to Ptolemy, fought fiercely against Caesar's legions. Fires swept through the great library, and the city's streets ran with blood. But Cleopatra knew how this would end. Rome was simply too powerful. Ptolemy XIII, in a final attempt to escape, fled into the Nile River. But the gods had already chosen their victor. The young king's boat capsized, and he was swallowed by the waters. His body was later found washed up on the shore, his golden armor still clinging to his lifeless frame. The war was over. Cleopatra had won. But victory came with a price. Now, she was bound to Caesar, and their fates would be forever intertwined. The real battle was only beginning. With Ptolemy XIII dead and Alexandria firmly under Caesar's control, Cleopatra had reclaimed her throne. But she was no longer just the queen of Egypt. She was now Rome's closest ally, tied to its most powerful general. To secure her rule, she did what no other Egyptian monarch before her had done. She aligned herself fully with Rome. Her first act as ruler was to solidify her position. Caesar, ever the strategist, declared that Cleopatra would co-rule Egypt with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. It was a political move. Rome needed stability in Egypt, and keeping the illusion of shared power ensured that Cleopatra's rule would be seen as legitimate. But everyone knew the truth. She was the real ruler. Still, power came at a cost. Caesar would not stay in Egypt forever. He had a vast empire to run, and soon he would have to return to Rome. Cleopatra, understanding the dangers of being left unprotected, did something that shocked both Rome and Egypt. She bore Caesar's child. A son. Ptolemy XV Philopator Philometor Caesar, better known as Caesarion, or Little Caesar. This changed everything. For Cleopatra, Caesarion was not just an heir. He was a symbol of the future, a future where Rome and Egypt were one, where her son would rule both lands as the most powerful ruler the world had ever seen. But this vision was not shared by everyone. In 46 BC, Cleopatra traveled to Rome. She arrived not as a mere visitor but as a queen, bringing with her the full splendor of Egypt. She did not stay in the city itself, but in Caesar's private villa, a bold move that humiliated Roman senators who saw her as a foreign threat. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that Caesar planned to make Cleopatra his wife, an act that would shatter Roman traditions. Others feared that he intended to declare himself a king, with Cleopatra as his queen. The idea of a woman, an Egyptian queen, no less, holding power in Rome terrified the Senate. And so, they plotted against him. In 44 BC, the knives came out. On the Ides of March, Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by his closest allies. As the blood soaked the floor of the Senate, Cleopatra's dreams of ruling alongside him died with him. For the first time in years, Cleopatra was truly alone. She fled Rome immediately, taking Caesarion with her. Without Caesar's protection, she was vulnerable. The Roman Republic was in chaos, divided between those who had killed Caesar and those who sought to avenge him. Among the most powerful men in Rome were Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir. They formed a temporary alliance, vowing to hunt down Caesar's assassins and restore order. But Cleopatra had no illusions. She knew that eventually she would have to choose between them. For now, she had one priority: survival. Back in Egypt, she poisoned her brother, Ptolemy XIV, securing her throne once and for all. She then named Caesar as her co-ruler, ensuring that her son would inherit the kingdom. But Cleopatra knew that Egypt alone would not be enough. She needed Rome. And so, she waited, watching from afar as Rome tore itself apart. One day, a new power would rise from the ashes of Caesar's empire. When that day came, Cleopatra would be ready. What she did not yet know was that Rome's next ruler would not be her son. It would be the man who would become both her greatest lover and her greatest downfall. Mark Antony. For 3 years, Cleopatra ruled alone, watching as Rome descended into chaos and bloodshed. The assassination of Julius Caesar had left a power vacuum, and his former allies turned on each other, each seeking control over the greatest empire in the world. 2 men had emerged as the strongest contenders: Octavian, the cold and calculating adopted heir of Caesar, and Mark Antony, the bold and charismatic general who had once been Caesar's most trusted commander. Their uneasy alliance was built on revenge, as they hunted down Caesar's murderers and executed them without mercy. But Cleopatra knew this peace would not last. Soon, they would turn on each other. And when they did, she had to be on the winning side. The seduction of Mark Antony. In 41 BC, the call came. Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, demanding her loyalty and questioning her role in the power struggle. Antony was now one of the most powerful men in Rome, and Cleopatra knew that her survival depended on winning his favor. But Cleopatra was not a woman who simply obeyed commands. Instead of arriving as a frightened subject, she orchestrated one of the most spectacular entrances in history. As Antony waited, expecting a humbled queen, Cleopatra sailed down the Cydnus River on a golden barge, draped in silk and jewels, surrounded by incense-burning maidens dressed as goddesses. She presented herself not as a mere mortal, but as Aphrodite herself, the goddess of love. Antony, known for his love of excess, indulgence, and beauty, was captivated instantly. But this was not just a romance, it was a political alliance. Cleopatra needed Antony's protection to secure her throne and ensure the safety of her son, Caesar. Antony, in turn, needed Cleopatra's wealth to fund his ambitions in the East. Their love affair was legendary, a whirlwind of banquets, hunting trips, and drunken revelry, with both rulers indulging in games of disguise, dressing as commoners and walking through Alexandria like ordinary citizens. But beneath the extravagance lay deadly ambition. Cleopatra was not simply Antony's lover, she was his equal, his partner in ruling the world. Or so she thought. Back in Rome, Octavian watched in disgust. To him, Cleopatra was not a queen, she was a dangerous seductress, poisoning the mind of his greatest rival. When Antony married Cleopatra and declared that Caesar was the rightful heir to Caesar, Octavian had the excuse he needed. In 32 BC, Rome declared war, not on Mark Antony, but on Cleopatra. The final battle came in 31 BC, at Actium, where Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet faced Octavian's navy. It was a disaster. Cleopatra, seeing that the battle was lost, fled back to Egypt, and Antony, desperate and broken, followed her. His legions deserted him, his allies betrayed him, and soon, he was left with nothing but his queen. The once great general was a defeated man. When Octavian's forces marched on Alexandria, Antony received false news that Cleopatra had died. Devastated, he fell on his own sword, choosing death over capture. But as he lay dying, he was told the truth: Cleopatra was still alive. With his last breaths, Antony was carried to her, and he died in her arms. Cleopatra had lost everything. Her lover was dead. Her armies had abandoned her. And Octavian was coming for her. Cleopatra knew what fate awaited her. Octavian wanted her alive, not to honor her, but to parade her through the streets of Rome as a trophy, just as he had done with other defeated kings and queens. She would not give him that satisfaction. Legend says she locked herself in her chamber, dressed in her royal robes, and allowed herself to be bitten by a poisonous asp. When Octavian's soldiers burst into the room, they found her lifeless body, the last great queen of Egypt, lying in eternal peace. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt fell. It became just another province of Rome, and Caesarion, the last blood heir of Julius Caesar, was hunted down and executed. The age of the pharaohs was over. But Cleopatra's story did not die with her. Her name would be remembered for centuries, as a ruler, a strategist, a lover, and the woman who almost changed the fate of the world. Even after her death, Cleopatra haunted Rome. She had been Octavian's greatest enemy, and though he had won, he knew that her influence would never truly disappear. He forbade any public display of her likeness, fearing that she would become a martyr, a symbol of defiance. He even spread propaganda, painting her as a seductress who had bewitched Mark Antony, rather than the brilliant strategist she was. But the people did not forget her. Poets, artists, and writers spoke of her not as a villain, but as a queen who had defied an empire. Her story passed from generation to generation, growing into a myth, a legend, an icon. Over the centuries, Cleopatra's image changed. Some saw her as the ultimate femme fatale, a woman who used her beauty to manipulate powerful men. Others recognized the truth. She was a ruler, a warrior, and a visionary who had fought for her kingdom until the very end. Despite all that is known about Cleopatra, one great mystery remains. Where is her tomb? The Romans claimed she was buried with Mark Antony, in a grand mausoleum somewhere near Alexandria. But no one has ever found it. For centuries, archaeologists have searched for Cleopatra's final resting place, hoping to uncover the secrets she took with her to the grave. Some believe her tomb lies beneath the waves of the Mediterranean Sea, swallowed by time and history. Others think it may be hidden deep within the ruins of Taposiris Magna, an ancient temple near Alexandria. But to this day, her burial site remains undiscovered, adding yet another layer of mystery to the queen who refused to be forgotten. Was Cleopatra truly as beautiful as history suggests, or was it her intelligence, charm, and power that made her unforgettable? Tell us what you think in the comments section.